Thank you for selecting our talk on Project Omega, an update on the new cataloguing system. My name is Faith Lawrence and I am a data analyst for the Catalogue Taxonomy and Data Department and also Product Manager for Project Omega. I am joined for this presentation by my colleague Alex Green, who is the Pan-Archival Catalogue Service Owner, of which Project Omega is part. Some of you may have listened to my presentation last year on Project Omega, envisioning a new cataloguing system for the National Archives. In which case, thank you, and thank you for coming back. And to the lovely people who left us a like, thank you, Mum. I'm not going to go over everything I covered last time. If you are interested in the first stage of the project and our decisions around data models, the link to the talk is on the slide. This presentation is intended to provide an update to the project, both in terms of where we are now, 1 year on, and what the next steps are going forward. One of the first things that has changed is that our team has expanded. We now boast 2 RDF developers, Rob Walpole and Jeshri Davey, with the third hopefully joining us soon, as well as our technical architect, Adam Retter. On the TNA side, I have been joined by our delivery manager, Susanna Bakadax, my fellow data analyst, Julius Welby, and, keeping us on track, our new service owner, Alex Green, who we lured away from digital archiving. We are still a small team with a big dream, so to start us off, I will hand over to Alex to give us a brief overview of that dream.
Behind our online catalogue, there is a collection of databases and software that allow us to manage the 32 million record descriptions you can see on Discovery. When you search or browse Discovery, it may seem that little changes, but in a typical year, well over 500,000 record descriptions are added, 5,400 are amended in response to user suggestions, and many thousands become open. All of these changes are managed using an editorial system designed in 1999. Since then, we've thought a lot about records and how they are used. We know that more is learnt about them, which changes our understanding over time. Also, since then, technology has linked the world through the internet, which allows us to connect our records in new ways, not only within our own catalogue, but to others. In Project Omega, we have the chance to radically rethink how we use the information we have about our records. This slide shows a variety of linked data held by other organisations worldwide. What if our records were linked to other records, to those elsewhere in our catalogue, or in other archives in the UK, or in museums, galleries and archives all over the world? What if you could see the changes made to record descriptions in the catalogue? For example, you could view the new description, enhanced by one of the catalogue projects presented as part of this catalogue week, such as the war diaries of the Second World War, alongside the old description, alongside any errors that were corrected, such as a date or a spelling, which might have made the record harder to find in the past. What if you could see more information about a record, such as what conservation actions have been performed on a medieval deed, what software a digital file was created in, or whether a digital record had been altered since it came into the archive? This is a vision for our new catalogue, and all of this will be possible when the project is complete. Here's our project roadmap, our plan. You can see that we have more detail for the rest of this year and less for the following year, as we can't be as certain about what will be possible. This year, we're focusing on converting the core of our catalogue, the main information you see on Discovery, into linked data and validating that it's correct, designing the technical architecture to ensure that other systems at TNA can receive and send data back to the catalogue to ensure that it holds the canonical version of information about our records, and designing the new editorial interface to allow staff to create and edit the catalogue data in a way that makes their work easier, more efficient, and preserves a record of those changes over time. I won't attempt to explain linked data, as you can view Faith's previous Catalogue Day presentation for that, but I would like to give you a visual idea of the difference between our current approach to cataloguing records compared to the possibilities of our future catalogue. The current catalogue is modelled in the blue diagram on the lower left. Each series belongs to a single department and each record belongs to one series. And if that record mentions a named individual, it is only sometimes tagged as a person, More often the name is not tagged, but it is just part of the text of the description, so there is no way of searching specifically for a person of that name. There is no mention of earlier descriptions of the record, and you can't see differently redacted versions of a digital record that have been available in the past. The future catalogue, however, shows all of this. It enables us to see that a record not only belongs to the series it was placed in by the government department when it was transferred, but it also belongs to a series of records that were loaned to the British Library for an exhibition. This catalogue would show you any other records that were included in that exhibition, not only those from TNA's collection, but ideally the records loaned from other archives. Also in this new model, we can see that two individuals are linked to a single record, but no link exists between those two people. Their link to the record, however, allows us to discover another person who may be of relevance to our research. The future catalogue also shows us different versions of a description over time as catalogue enhancement projects, user suggestions and corrections have changed it. And finally, the redacted record is still available even when the full record has been opened, allowing us to see what information was considered sensitive previously. This is just a flavour of what will be possible with the new catalogue. I'll now hand you back to Faith to give more detail about how this is being achieved.
From that overview, I'm going to take us back, briefly, to where we were this time last year. Having decided on the underlying data model, and therefore a linked data approach, the next stage was to implement it with the existing catalogue data. That is, convert the current data, which is held in a normal relational database, into its new format. This conversion is not something that we're going to run just once. New information is being added to the catalogue every day. So until we get the two systems running in parallel, we will need to periodically take a copy of the existing database and extract the data to get any updates and changes since our last copy. Creating the conversion process involves identifying how the information in the current system maps into the new model, and therefore whether anything is missing, either from the data or from the model. If the data model doesn't fully express the concepts that we need, then expanding the model until it meets our requirements. Finally, creating the rules for looking up the necessary information for each aspect of the model and writing it into the new format. These rules ensure that the existing information is extracted into the desired model and lay out what should be done if the information is not available. Having created these rules or pipelines, the process can be run on the data whenever we want, creating a new version of the data meeting our specifications. For this process, we are using an open source tool called Pentaho Spoon, developed by Hitachi Vantara. Pentaho supports extract, transform, load (ETL) processes and makes it easy to chain together different steps. This is important because each bit of information about a record has its own step in the transformation. For example, the title, closure status, and the scope content of the record are all separate pieces of information that each have their own journey through the extraction pipeline to populate the new data elements which describe a given record. Unlike the current system, our data model, similar to FRBA, the functional requirements for bibliographic records, models three levels of conceptualization for a record. Concept, a record transferred to TNA and asserted as a new intellectual entity within TNA's control. Description, a record will have one or more descriptions which will facilitate and document TNA's intellectual control over that entity. And finally, realization, a record will have one or more realizations which will facilitate and document TNA's control over the actual bits, physical or digital, that make up the record. So each piece of information in the current system needs to be recorded at the correct conceptual layer or layers. Our team of developers are able to work on the different tasks independently and then use Pentaho to bring the different strands together into one pipeline. Pentaho provides tools to set up and manage this workflow, including a visualization of the components and the links between them, making it easier to see how everything fits together. For multiple developers to be able to work together on the same codebase, even on different components of it, requires careful organisation. We are currently in the process of two significant infrastructural shifts. The first is from the single private GitHub repository that we were using to store our code at the start of the project, to multiple repositories, each related to a component of the project. This migration allows us to better scope the different parts and helps prevent the codebase from becoming too unwieldy. It is also the first step towards moving to an open development model, which is our eventual goal. The second is from developing on local machines to developing in the cloud. This reduces the differences between the different computers that the developers were working on, and therefore bugs caused by slight differences in setup, by creating identical environments in cloud-based virtual machines. For the moment, this migration to AWS is just the development of environments and doesn't include the triple store, a linked data specialized database, that will hold the final output from the migrated data, or the search system that will be integrated with it. As I explained in the previous slide, we are working on an iterative approach where we repeatedly extract the data from the database, getting a bit more each time as our pipeline is built up until finally we are able to extract all the data into our model. Because we are carrying out the extraction repeatedly, we are not currently needing to store the extracted data. If we need it, we can just run the extraction again. One of the next stages of the project, however, will be to set up the triple store and search tools so that it is available to explore, both for ourselves and for other projects at TNA who might want to work with the data in that format. As well as the infrastructure, as the code gets more complex, it is important to ensure that there are no unintended consequences of changes made to the code. To prevent this, our developers have planned and started implementing a test suite which sets up a number of conditions that the output of each data attribute must match. This allows us to ensure that the output meets the cataloging guidelines and our expectations for each value. We can use this when we need to make big changes to the organisation of the components in the pipeline to make sure that the output was the same before and after the restructuring, for example. And also it helps us find any unexpected values in the data. Even during the setup of the testing system, we were able to identify two problems. One was something that hadn't been fully implemented in the code, and the other was a problem with the record data. One immediate benefit of the extraction process, and, ironically, one reason that it has been taking longer than we had initially hoped, has been the need to clean up some of the data. When the rules are created for how a piece of information should be transformed, they rely on that piece of information meeting a set of expected criteria. These criteria could be as simple as the title of a record should either be a text string or it should be blank, or it could be more complex. Pretty much anything involving dates or any fields involving markup such as paragraph or lists are likely to be more complex. At an even more fundamental level, some computer operating systems encode symbols in slightly different ways. The new data system requires all the characters and symbols to be encoded in the accepted international standard. Unfortunately, a few characters have snuck into the catalogue data over the years which don't meet that criteria and therefore have to be corrected. When we hit a problem in the extraction, we are able to check with the cataloguing team to confirm whether it is a problem with the system or with the underlying data. We've been working closely with them to correct the catalogue data when these errors are identified. Some of these improvements are only present in the extracted data, but the majority have been fed back into the current system to enhance the existing catalogue. I should note at this point that the process is not able to check whether the data is correct, just that it meets the criteria specified in the cataloguing guidelines. The data cleaning functions are able to identify that a record was not dated February the 31st, because it is not a valid date in the Gregorian calendar, but if the record was dated July the 5th, and, when it was entered into the catalogue, that date had been mistyped as June the 5th, then the incorrect value would still be accepted because it still meets the requirements of being a valid date. One example of this process is language codes. The UK Open Government Standards recommend using ISO standard 6391 2-letter language codes to describe languages and documents. When the developers implemented this, they found that the standard did not cover the range of languages that were present in TNA's records. To solve this, we made the decision to use ISO standard 16392, 3-letter language codes, since it was able to meet our needs. However, in investigating this question, it became apparent that some of the language codes currently in use were either outdated or used inconsistently. Working with the Catalogue team, we were able to identify these anomalous records. For example, OTT used for Ottoman Turkish rather than OTA, or MIS for miscellaneous, which was used when there were more than 4 languages instead of the correct term MUL for multi. Fixes were made to the existing catalogue, improving the experience for the current user, as well as making the extraction process easier. For each attribute of the record, we also consider what we do when we encounter missing data. In some cases, there should always be a value, and, in the rare cases that it is missing, the catalogue team need to step in. And in others, it is not always present, but there may be a default value that can be included when a gap is found. Not all our records have language information attached at the present time. This means that if you search for documents in a specific language, you will only get returned those where the language is known, which may not be the full set. It would have been nice to use this opportunity to add language information, but, while a majority of our records might be in English, it is by no means universal, especially in our historical documents. So while we could have defaulted to English when the language wasn't known, we felt it was better to not provide any information than to provide information on language that may have been both inaccurate and misleading. However, with the new data structure, it will be easier to find the records that don't have a language in the future, and these gaps will be corrected over time as part of the ongoing catalogue enhancement work. The catalogue is the heart of any archive. If we make our new catalogue and editorial system correctly, it will help keep the information flowing smoothly around the different systems that make up TNA, only a fraction of which are depicted on this slide. We are going through a period of change here at the archive. Not just the catalogue and the editorial workflows, but a significant number of these other systems are also currently undergoing re-evaluation and redevelopment. This offers an amazing opportunity for growth and improvement, but means that many of the decisions that we have to make are part of a wider conversation about how these new systems, some beginning to go into production and others only just beginning to be thought about, will work together. As you saw in our roadmap, the data is only one strand of many in this project, and while we have been focusing on it over the past year, in part to verify our data model and ensure we are building on a solid foundation, it is not our only concern. Deciding on the technical approach for the API, that is, how the different systems will communicate with each other, requires consensus across the different projects, and Omega is in the forefront of that conversation because our final product will connect to so many of the other systems around TNA. One significant component of Project Omega, and where it all began, is replacing PROCAT Editorial, the editorial system that is used internally to manage the catalogue so that it can be published on TNA's website through discovery. While we had previously done some elicitation exercises with some of the editorial user base, we do not currently have the expertise in our team to ensure that the user experience suitably supports their needs in a streamlined and accessible way. This month saw the start of the next phase of front-end development, which I like to call PROCAT Evolution, with the appointment of Torchbox to analyse the business workflows and processes and to deliver and user test designs for the new interface. This work will put us in position to start working on building the interface in the next financial year. Keep an eye out for the blog post on PROCAT Evolution that is coming out this week, introducing this part of the project and Torchbox. I hope that this talk has given you a glimpse into the work that we've been doing on Project Omega and some of the complexities that we have been grappling with as we start making our dream for a pan-archival catalogue a reality. The link at the bottom of this slide is the Project Omega webpage, which contains ongoing details of the project and links to the reports and resources related to it. If you have any questions about Project Omega and the future direction of the catalogue, you could contact us at catalogueprojects@nationalarchives.gov.uk. Thank you for listening.